Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Rosh Mohammed Saleh here, Editor-in-Chief of Five Pillars. And this is The Big Picture, which is our new weekly show where we break down the main hot red button topics of the week that Muslims are talking about. It's our antidote rather to the mainstream media. I hope you guys aren't following the mainstream anymore, because ultimately they're just there to screw you. They're just there to target you as Muslims. Five Pillars and other Muslim media, we're the ones that represent you and represent your voices. Okay, what we're talking about today, we're talking about two things. One is the Labour Party conference. It's been a virtual conference this year because of coronavirus. Keir Starmer, the new leader of the Labour Party, who took over from Jeremy Corbyn, gave his keynote speech to the Labour Party conference earlier today, and he basically said, we are ditching Corbynism. Not in those direct words like I've just said to you now, but that is ultimately the context of what he said. We're also going to be talking about the UN General Assembly, where the UN, basically the world leaders, give these annual speeches to the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Obviously, COVID's hit this year, so they're all doing it virtually. But Donald Trump spoke, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, spoke, and we're going to be breaking down their speeches. Trump basically portrayed America as the peacemaker. The country that has been at a continuous war for God knows how many years is the peacemaker, according to Donald J. Trump. And he says that America enforces peace through strength. And obviously he listed America's main enemies, the usual suspects, those bad guys like China, like Iran, like ISIS, etc., etc. But we'll get on to Donald Trump in a little while. We've got two cracking guests coming up. Firstly, I want to talk about Keir Starmer, because basically the new Labour leader, he said today that Labour needs to win elections. It's lost 4 elections in a row, and you can't just blame the electorate. You got to look internally as well. Labour is under new management. This is not the path of Jeremy Corbyn. This is a new path they'll be taking. He praised Tony Blair for modernizing the Labour Party. He praised NATO. He said it was wonderful to go to Buckingham Palace and be knighted by the Queen, one of the proudest moments of his parents' lives. It was an anti-Corbyn speech, even though he didn't actually mention Corbyn by name even once. And who was he introduced by? He was introduced by Ruth Smeeth, who was basically worked at BICOM, an Israeli advocacy organization. And that was a clear signal to everyone out there that this is a party that is going to allegedly crack down on anti-Semitism. It is no longer the party of the Muslims. It is no longer a party which is going to talk about Islamophobia. No, it's going to talk about Israel and anti-Semitism. So basically, back to New Labour days, guys. Let's take a little listen to what Keir Starmer said earlier on today.
It has been difficult to be Jewish in the Labour Party in recent years. We lost too many friends who were bullied out of the party, and too many people who have been hurt by a visceral racism that should have no home in our movement. But under Keir's new leadership, I know that the trauma of the last few years will begin to heal.
Until we come out of the shadows, this party can't change anything. The promise that brought us into politics to change the country for the better is pointless if all we can do is to object to endless Tory governments. So let's be blunt. Let's be brutally honest with ourselves. When you lose an election in a democracy, you deserve to. You don't look at the electorate and ask them, what were you thinking? You look at yourself and ask, what were we doing? The Labour Party has lost 4 general elections in a row. We've granted the Tories a decade of power. The Tories have had as many election winners in 5 years as we've had in 75. It's a betrayal of what we believe in to let this go on. It's time to get serious about winning. That means we have to change. And that's what we're doing. This is a party under new leadership. I promised on my first day as leader that we will root out anti-Semitism by its roots. We're making progress, and we will root it out once and for all.
So that was Keir Starmer, Labour Party leader, speaking a little bit earlier today. All right, without further ado, let's get our first guest on. Great guest, Shakeel Afsar, who is from Birmingham, a pro-Kashmiri activist and general rabble-rouser in Birmingham, aren't you, Shakeel? How are you doing, brother?
Thank you for having me. Alhamdulillah. I try not to be, but some would say.
Shakeel, I can't hear you very well. Are you near the camera? Are you... Perfect.
Yes.
I can hear you loud and clear. Just speak
better?
up a little bit when you talk to
Okay.
talk to me. That's okay, Shakeel. Shakeel,
No-
you were
no
a
problem,
Labour Party
Professor.
member, weren't you? But you tore that card up. Why'd you do that?
Well, I, along with about 12 other family and close friends, we were Labour Party members for quite some time. And not only just members, quite active members who would actually take part and partake. The reason I threw the card away is because as soon as Keir Starmer was brought into the Labour office, he completely did a U-turn on the Kashmiri people. He did a U-turn on all those people who peddled his message amongst our communities, all those people who, said vote Labour because they're the so-called Muslim voice. And by what he clearly stated was that the India and Kashmir dispute is not an international issue. It's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. A clear U-turn on us as Muslims. And as you know, Birmingham has the largest Kashmiri Muslim community who have voted Labour year on year without looking at what candidates are, without even really Labour even putting a campaign out here in Birmingham. The Birmingham vote is kind of a blind vote for Labour. And the big question that you're asking today is a very just one. I feel personally they do not represent us. If anything, they're actually anti-Muslims now.
Shakeel, I know that you listened to Keir Starmer's speech today.
Yes.
It had a focus on anti-Semitism. He didn't mention Israel by name, but that was the context. Everyone understood that. What did you make of his speech?
Well, like you quite clearly said, for him to get Ruth Smith, a member of parliament who is known to be a pro-Israel activist, who's been known to peddle message at every given opportunity, and for the fact that him to emphasize and not talk about the Kashmir issue, not talk about the rights of the Palestinians, not to even mention them in any way, shape or form, when Labour has such a strong Muslim backing for the Labour leader to basically ignore us, then unfortunately I would have to say that the shame is really on us for us remaining in a party when the Labour leader is not even acknowledging us and not even giving us a couple of seconds of his time.
Do you think there's going to be an exodus away from Labour, Shakeel, in the next election? I mean, it seems to me that despite everything, Labour can still count on that Muslim vote to a certain extent.
Roshan, I'm a very hopeful thinker, and I was having a conversation with my father a few days ago. About 20 years ago, when my community was a big supporter of Labour, the bringer of information in any household was the eldest person, whether wrong or right. At the current stage where we are in, I'm hoping and praying that in the next general election, we as young British Muslims can get independent candidates set up and have clear representation for our communities and our people, because unfortunately Labour is not the way forward. Because when you really scratch beneath the surface, our votes are, and our voices are just, they just second guess us. They expect our votes, even if they were to put up a donkey, excuse my French, as a candidate, they would expect our community's vote. And I think in the next general election, they are going to find it very hard, because people like myself are now taking it upon educating the community about really what is representation. Have we a seat in parliament? Have we a voice that is speaking about those innocent children who are being killed in their sleep in Gaza? Do we have any voice who's speaking about the Hindu mobs who are lynching our sisters? And then in Birmingham, again, just to add, we have 3 Kashmiri members of parliament who are all under the Labour Party, and they're completely silent. And what we have, how the Labour Party whips up their drama is we have local councillors here in Birmingham. And I have nothing against any councillor, what their personal views on life, but talking as a realist, you've got councillors who are in charge of local communities and rubbish, who are talking international politics with communities and misguiding them. These local communities look up to these councillors as these are the people who are going to voice our voice in the international community, Labour councillors, and when their job is to really clear up the mess. And our MPs, who actually should be taking that voice up, speaking, are not doing so. And I think going forward, they've literally got a padlock on their mouth now, because anything speaking that seems to be against the narrative of what Mr. Keir has just stated, it's going to be hard for them.
But you know, Shakeel, the counter argument, I mean, I agree with you. I can't understand why Muslims, you know, with Labour's track record of wars in the past and their clear direction back towards the Tony Blair years, I don't understand how Muslims can vote for that party. However, the fact is, a lot of Muslims out there disagree with both you and me, because they still do that. And I guess the counter argument has always been, look, if we're not inside the system, if we don't have any influence inside the system, then we're completely out of power. So it's better to have like literally 10%, 5% influence than no influence whatsoever.
Well, saying that, actually, at the last time I was on a show with the MP for Gorton, Mr. Afzal Khan, who's actually a Labour MP as well, and he stated the same thing. He said, why are you cutting your card up? Why are you cutting your card up? And why are you not working from within? Well, then my quite blunt and maybe it might sound as draconian answer would be, because I'm Muslim. Because I'm Muslim, I cannot be a party to people who are dropping bombs on small children. I'm Muslim. I'm not going to associate my belief and my religion and my morals with a party that has completely contradictory views to that. And now I would use this message to say, I implore my brothers and sisters, there are a lot of young, educated British Muslims who could be doing a far better job on the £80,000 salary that these member of parliaments are getting. And we need to motivate that. We really need to take out the control from the ethnic minorities, whatever they may be. Whatever they may be, they need to become more proactive in understanding the election process, because up until last year, I myself was not even had much understanding. And it's as if they keep you in the dark. It's as if they have these local council meetings. They're not really advertised to many people. It's kind of a monopoly. It's kept in the family. The son's father's a councillor. His son becomes a councillor, because they're all told the Labour narrative. I myself personally, my answer to that question would be because I'm Muslim. And if I want to live as a Muslim, then I cannot sleep at night knowing that I'm part of a party, which in my lifetime, I'm not going to ever be able to change. Whereas if I was to, with the technology we have, with the resources, with brothers like you and 5 Pillars, with organizations, by us supporting organizations like 5 Pillars, it's be instrumental to get these people out of power.
Look, Shakeel, if we're going to tell Muslims don't vote, don't support Labour, we've got to give them an alternative. What is that alternative?
Well, again, now, without giving too much details away, in Birmingham, there is a large group of people who are working up to set up a party that is going to be basically is going to represent ethnic minorities with a clear representation. With a clear representation that this is what our people feel, this is what is happening to us, and we're not going to accept anything otherwise. You know, Keir Starmer failed to speak about Islamophobia. Who is going to protect our sisters who are being spat at on the road? Who's going to protect our brothers who are being targeted only because they want somewhere to pray? And the fact of the matter is, I implore all of you, every single person, and most of the people who are in the Labour Party currently, really look at your membership and ask yourself, when you pass on this life and you stand before the Almighty, are you really going to be justified? I'm not saying, you ask yourself, look into yourself, are you really going to be justified for paying them £4 or £5 a month to kill your brothers and sisters, to clout the name of what's going on around the world with the Muslims? Is clear. It's as clear as day. And I think we need to really push this message to our communities, because the propaganda that the Labour mechanism has, elect certain councillors in the area, everyone follows them, don't really give everyone an understanding of what's going on, how it's happening, or provide that information readily. Change is going to come, and inshallah, I implore more independent candidates up and down the UK to join forces, whether you're a small constituency, whether you're one thingy. But in Birmingham, I assure you, Roshan, if I'm still alive at the next general election, we will be making sure that Labour and Muslims here understand what they're voting for, and they will have an alternative to vote.
Shakeel, I can't let you go. Just out of contributions today, but I can't let you go without asking you about the LGBT issue in schools, because that's what you've become famous for, isn't it, over the last couple of years, and demonized in the mainstream media for as well. Obviously, we're in COVID, but schools have started again. Where is this issue in Birmingham? Just update the viewers about it, please.
Just slightly before I update the viewers, I'd just like to say, when I got engrossed into this, the children are learning at a young age, the first people I approached was the Labour councillors, was the Labour members of Parliament. And to be quite honest with you, Roshan, I feel actually ashamed to actually say the responses I was given. We can't speak. We'll lose our position. We'll lose this. And it's a shame for that position. But albeit the RSE program has been suspended till September 2020. There is some schools who are actively going to take part, who have a pro-LGBT agenda. And just to clarify, while I'm on 5 pillars, I never have questioned the rights or wrongs of homosexuality. My issue was that our children should be taught in line with the Human Rights Act, which clearly states that every child should be educated in line with his or her parents' philosophical or religious convictions. So it is an uphill battle. And a lot of people said to me, Shakeel, and I'll say this openly because I have a lot of respect for 5 pillars and the work that they do. A lot of Labour members and, a lot of Labour people who are in the Labour mechanism said, Shakeel, you've got a little bit of talent. You can have a little bit of a talk. Come, stop this and come and join the Labour Party. Yeah. And I said to them at that point, look, are you going to speak about this issue? Are you going to talk? And unfortunately, as we all know, it was Raja Godsif, who was not even a Muslim. And maybe because he was at a certain age in his life, he stood by his principles. And unfortunately, the rest of those people never. So can really Labour represent us? I think not.
Shukran. Thank you very much, Shakeel. Really pleasure. And see you soon up there in Brum. Assalamu alaikum. All right, before we move on to our next topic, let's go to viewers' comments. They've been flooding in, alhamdulillah. So let's read out a few of them. Last week I got told off because I was just clicking on the comments. They were coming up and there was swearing, there was sectarianism. So this time I'm going to be a bit more careful about what I put up. So Bilal Abdul Majid says Muslims shouldn't vote in the first place. It's kufr and nullifies Islam. That is an Islamic opinion, but I also think there's a legitimate Islamic opinion which says you can vote. But it's good to have that diversity of opinion and ikhtilaf. Okay, Muslim says that will never happen because Labour always gets huge majorities in Muslim areas. I can never see this happening. Talking about ditching Labour. Yeah, at the moment, the Labour Party, the Muslim vote, obviously Muslims, when they came here, they were working class, right? They were the ones that built this country up, from its infrastructure, NHS, factories, etc. So they gravitated to Labour as allegedly the party of the working masses. But obviously when Tony Blair came in, it was no longer the party of the NHS. It was no longer the party of the welfare state. It basically stole the Tory clothes. And especially in the 1980s, Thatcher won those kind of economic neoliberal ideas. She won the battle of ideas, and Tony Blair basically shifted Labour towards the right. And then we know what happened next. Neoliberalism, capitalism at home, and basically war abroad. Corbyn took Labour in a different direction, but he has been comprehensively defeated by the mainstream media, by internal politics within his own Labour Party, fellow MPs stabbing him in the back, and ultimately now under Keir Starmer, Labour is New Labour once more, the party of neoliberalism and probably wars abroad. Let's go to Sani J. Hussain, who says that Corbynism simply didn't work. Maybe you're right, maybe you're not. Ibrahim says, short answer, Muslims can either apply pressure on Labour to represent us properly and take our community seriously rather than for granted, or we take our votes elsewhere. And I think ultimately Muslims have been remiss in not pressuring the Labour Party, not pressuring the other parties, and simply going there and voting for them and getting nothing in return whatsoever. That is, I mean, only a fool does that, surely. Sunu says 1,000% ditch the Labour Party. Ibrahim Imran says, since finding 5 Pillars has become one of the very few news I've been following. Jazakallah khair, Ibrahim Imran. 5 Pillars is the future. Muslim says, Labour will always win in Muslim areas. Fact. Sabina says, depends on your local MP. No reason to blindly support Labour. Check your MP's voting record and what he says about key issues that matter to you. Let's scroll down a bit. I'm getting lots of comments, alhamdulillah. Amreen Khan says, we shouldn't leave, but rather increase lobbying within the party, specifically with those relying on the Muslim vote in their constituency. We should make it clear that should be the local MP. I think George Galloway benefited a few times from the Muslim vote, quite frankly, in Bethnal Green, up in Bradford as well. But whether he delivered on that, trust placed in him by Muslim voters is another thing entirely. There might have been a few other examples of the Muslim vote being effective, but generally, I'm yet to be convinced that the Muslim vote is effective. The MCB and others, they always tell us, get out there, vote. The Muslim vote is going to be the kingmaker. I'm quite frankly yet to see that. Maybe one day it will happen. Bang on, the Labour Party is a joke. Fake Labour, if anything. True Labour would never support the Zionist terrorist state of Israel. A few more comments before I go on to the next topic. Corbyn was a friend of Muslims and Starmer helped bring him down. Now Starmer is a friend of Israel. Muslims should be mobilizing to condemn this political coup. We outnumber our enemies, but are too lazy to act. It is interesting, isn't it? Because the Jewish community in this country, and the majority of Jews in this country perhaps would be pro-Israel. A minority would be anti-Israel, but I would say maybe 80% at least would be pro-Israel. Their numbers are quite low. Muslim numbers are quite large. But in terms of the agenda of the Jewish community being on the national agenda, ultimately it completely outweighs the Muslim community in proportion to their numbers. So we have to think, why is that the case? Saneh J. Hussein says, what's the bigger picture? Just like USA called the leader a fascist, we're going to be overrun by Zionist agenda here in the UK, which is anti-Muslim Islamophobes. I think Israel has done a great job, to be quite frank, in terms of its PR and in terms of getting its message across in the UK, in terms of the mainstream media, but also in terms of Parliament. It really does have considerable influence over the levers of power, financial institutions, or not financial, I meant media institutions and political institutions in this country. Said Ali says Netanyahu is backing both leaders, so whatever happens, he wins. Yeah, Israel probably wouldn't be too unhappy if Keir Starmer got in. They certainly would have been unhappy if Corbyn got in, and they did everything to make sure that Corbyn lost that election, and ultimately they won and he lost. Maybe we all lost. Michael Ward says, why don't we start our own party? I think Shakeel earlier was alluding to that. A couple more comments before we move on. Mansour Irshad says, why not stick with Boris for the next 10 years? No, thank you very much. I've got to say, Boris is a joke. He's completely not up to the job. I mean, have you ever listened to him speak in Parliament? I've had the misfortune of actually watching Prime Minister's questions and watching his speeches. The guy is inarticulate. He can hardly put a word together. He's a bumbling idiot. He literally speaks drivel, and he's not, at least you could say Tony Blair was clever. At least you could say David Cameron was clever. Okay, this guy is not clever. This guy is thick as two short planks in many ways. But for some reason, he ruffles his hair, he's charming, and people go for it. Maybe that says something about the British electorate. Last comment, Talib Shamsuddin says, if you don't participate, you allow others to dictate. Don't leave Labour, organise. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second topic of the show. I could read out loads more comments, and jazakallah khair, everybody reading out those comments. But I am going to move on now to our second topic, and that is going to be UN General Assembly. And Yvonne Ridley is shortly going to discuss this issue with me. But basically, Donald Trump has been speaking today, as have other world leaders like Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey. Trump gave a blistering speech, quite frankly, in which he took out China. He took out ISIS. He took out Iran. He took out all America's enemies. He said America is the world's biggest peacekeeper, and he lauded the if I can get the banner up, America, the world's biggest peacemaker, question mark. He lauded America's deals, which they have facilitated with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Israel, with Serbia, Kosovo, and even Afghanistan. He says America is going to bring peace to Afghanistan soon. And he will basically, America will also empower women in Afghanistan. He talked about China. His main target in the speech was China. And quite frankly, his rhetoric against China was unbelievable. He called COVID-19 the China virus several times. So it's clear who America thinks its enemy is. And it's also clear that America thinks that it can forge peace through military strength. Let's take a little listen to what the orange one said a few hours ago.
We withdrew from the terrible Iran nuclear deal and imposed crippling sanctions on the world's leading state sponsor of terror. We obliterated the ISIS caliphate 100%, killed its founder and leader, al-Baghdadi, and eliminated the world's top terrorist, Qasem Soleimani. This month we achieved a peace deal between Serbia and Kosovo. We reached a landmark breakthrough with 2 peace deals in the Middle East after decades of no progress. Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain all signed a historic peace agreement in the White House, with many other Middle Eastern countries to come. They are coming fast, and they know it's great for them and it's great for the world. These groundbreaking peace deals are the dawn of the new Middle East. By taking a different approach, we have achieved different outcomes, far superior outcomes. We took an approach, and the approach worked. We intend to deliver more peace agreements shortly, and I have never been more optimistic for the future of the region. There is no blood in the sand. Those days are hopefully over. As we speak, the United States is also working to end the war in Afghanistan, and we are bringing our troops home. America is fulfilling our destiny as peacemaker, but it is peace through strength. We are stronger now than ever before. Our weapons are at an advanced level like we've never had before, like, frankly, we've never even thought of having before. And I only pray to God that we never have to use them.
Okay, we're also going to take, while we wait for our guests to come on, we're also going to take a little look at what Turkey's leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, had to say at the UN General Assembly just a few hours ago.
The order of occupation and oppression in Palestine, which is the bleeding wound of humanity, continues to hurt our consciences. The dirty hand that reaches the privacy of Jerusalem, where the sacred places of the 3 great religions coexist, is constantly increasing its audacity. The Palestinian people have stood up against Israel's policies of oppression, violence, and intimidation for more than half a century. Upon rejection of the document of surrender, which was tried to be imposed on Palestine under the name of the Deal of the Century, Israel this time accelerated its attempts to have the inside track with the help of its collaborators. Turkey will not support any plan that the Palestinian people do not give consent to. Participation of some countries of the region in this game does not mean anything beyond serving Israel's efforts to erode basic international parameters. Countries that have declared their intention to open embassies in Jerusalem, in violation of the United Nations resolutions and international law, only serve to make the conflict more complicated with their actions. The Palestinian conflict can only be resolved with the establishment of an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine, based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital.
Okay, that was Recep Tayyip Erdogan speaking about an hour ago at the UN General Assembly. We're still waiting for our guest, Yvonne Ridley, to join us. So I'm going to just kind of give you a little bit more of a flavor of what Erdogan said, because that was just a little snippet of it. So Erdogan, he started off by saying the UN needs to be reformed. And he said, 5 countries ruling the world in reference to the UN Security Council, that's America, China, Britain, France, and Russia, will no longer suffice, quite frankly, because it's a multilateral world with many powers around the world, and it can't just be ruled by 5 countries dictating to the rest. So he called for reform of the UN Security Council. He called the PKK a terror group. The PKK obviously is basically a group which is, fought within Turkey's border, and Turkey is fighting in northern Syria at this moment. He talked about the refugees that Turkey had hosted from Syria. He called for a resolution to the Syrian conflict. He blamed Europe for violating the rights of refugees. He said that Turkey had a humanitarian foreign policy. As we know, Turkey is involved in several arenas in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, elsewhere. Some call this neo-Ottomanism and actually criticize Erdogan for taking this stance. Some say that it's Turkey asserting its identity as the leader or one of the leaders of the Muslim world. And he called Palestine, as we've heard, a bleeding wound, and he criticized those countries who have done peace deals with Israel in reference to the UAE and Bahrain. Okay, we are joined finally by our guest, Yvonne Ridley, who is a very well-known journalist and commentator up there in the Scottish borders. Is that right, Yvonne?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so Yvonne, I've known Yvonne for a very long time now. I first met her in Qatar when we were both working for Al Jazeera. We've worked at other workplaces as well. Yvonne, probably still most famous for being kidnapped by the Taliban and falling off that horse and screaming "Flaming Nora" before the Taliban got your hands on you, but they did release you eventually, and you converted to Islam, and the rest is history. Yvonne, let's get straight into it. So, Trump and Erdogan have been speaking. Let's talk about Trump first. I thought it was a blistering speech. The guy certainly has the power of rhetoric, if nothing else. And he ultimately said that America is the world's biggest peacemaker, and they enforce peace through strength. What do you make of that?
Well, it's like all of Trump's speeches, big on rhetoric, very little on reality in there. It was a spiteful, hateful speech. There was certainly none of the values of the United Nations in the content. He kept referring to the coronavirus as the China virus, and it was typical of Trump. Plenty to say about how great he is, but actually none of his claims would really stand up to much rigor.
But from his point of view, Yvonne, he has got several deals over the line, hasn't he? There hasn't been a peace deal with Israel for like 25 years or something. So he's got that one. He's got 2, UAE and Bahrain. Obviously from our, sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah. What deal? Normalization with the UAE and Bahrain. To what ends? The UAE tried to tell us, oh, well, because we've intervened and signed up to this agreement, we've stopped Netanyahu from doing a land grab of the West Bank. And yet within hours of the treaty being signed, Netanyahu stated publicly, this doesn't mean to say that we're giving up the land grab of the West Bank. So, it has achieved absolutely nothing.
What about Afghanistan, Yvonne? I know that's a place very close to your heart. And he said that, we're talking to the Taliban now, we're going to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. And he said that women had been empowered in Afghanistan during the US occupation. They have much more participation in government and civil society, etc. What do you make of that?
Well, again, that's baloney. I don't see any career women emerging from the rubble in Kabul or outlying areas. Yes, there are a few green shoots of hope there. But as far as I can gather, the only legislation that has been reluctantly agreed to is to have women named on the equivalent of birth certificates. Up until fairly recently, nobody was allowed to mention the first name or the names of their mother, their wife, but these women are now allowed to have their names on official certificates. But that's just cosmetic.
Piddling, yeah, piddling, isn't it? It's like, I mean, I guess you don't liberate people by bombing them, do you? And you know, it's like in Iraq, you can vote in Iraq, but what does it mean? Because ultimately, there's no security there. So, yeah.
Armies have gone into Afghanistan to liberate the Afghan women. They should be among the most empowered women in the world because there's so many armies have gone in there to liberate them. It's absolute baloney. And you know, again, a shocking failure.
Yeah.
And the fact is that the American troops are still there, and there are still hundreds of Taliban prisoners being held who should have been released under the treaty.
Yvonne, I mean, I don't think I'm being rude by describing you as a veteran journalist, because you have been doing this for over 30 years, I think, and people call me a veteran journalist now as well. But I want to ask you about, you know, the US and China, because we've lived through, you know, the Cold War and then the end of the Cold War and America being preeminent. Do you feel the world is a different place now? Is America still top dog? Can it call the shots, do whatever it wants? Or do you think we live in a different world? It's clear that Trump is very, very worried about China.
Yes, I don't think America is calling the shots as much as Trump would like us to believe. And I think that the order of the world order is changing. And it's changing these things are very slow. You know, it's like a tanker maneuvering in the sea. It's very difficult to see the movement. But, you know, looking to where America is today to where it was 20 years ago, it's quite a different country. It's fragmented. It's crime is rising. The treatment and inequalities based on skin color, gender, you know, it's all there. And in fact, I think America is going backwards rather than forwards.
Before we move on from Trump, I want to ask you, I mean, I agree with everything you say, but I must admit, I was captivated by his speech today. It was a very short speech. I think he's got like a 5-point deficit versus Biden, hasn't he? He's going to make that up, isn't he? He's based on optics alone, based on delivery alone. I can just imagine Americans listening to that speech and feeling really pumped, like we are the best. He makes Americans feel great about themselves. He's going to win again, isn't he?
Well, his speech wasn't really directed at anyone in the United Nations or anyone in the world other than the American voters. That's who he was playing to. And, you know, he did a bit of Putin-style chest thumping, but it was purely for a domestic crowd. You know, there must have been quite a few eye rolls behind what was the mother of all Zoom conferences.
All right, let's get on to Erdogan now, because I guess during his quite long tenure as Turkish leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has cemented his position as one of the leaders of the Muslim world. Perhaps Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia are the three most powerful countries in the Muslim world. And some would say now that Turkey is perhaps the most powerful, or that's up for grabs, I would say. One of the first things that Erdogan said was that the UN needs reform. It's not 5 people running the world anymore. The whole institution is past its sell-by date. It's not the end of the Second World War. Do you agree with that? You must do.
I agree entirely. I mean, the United Nations came together with really noble thoughts and causes in mind after the horrors of World War II. But, you know, the UN Charter's preamble, we, the people of the United Nations, it's important to note that it refers to all of the world's citizens and not just their governments. But sadly, the United Nations has now become an organization without teeth. It has no bite. Nobody takes any real notice of it. And I think that it's very, very sad the way that this amazing organization has petered away into nothing. And the pandemic shows how weak the United Nations really is.
And Yvonne, he spent quite a long portion of his speech talking about refugees. I mean, Turkey has taken in, I'm not sure, it's definitely over 1 million or more than that, 3 million Syrian refugees.
Nearly 3 million Syrian refugees. The First Lady she was one of the first leaders out into the Rohingya crisis. She went and rolled up her sleeves in the camps in Bangladesh to help the Rohingya. They've shown a lot of solidarity there. He's also spoken up for the Uyghurs. And, he is the leader that a vast majority of the Muslim world are looking to for justice these days.
I mean, I'll be honest, I have mixed feelings about Erdogan myself in terms of, I mean, on the one hand, Turkey has relations with Israel. On the other hand, he criticizes Israel. And, sometimes I feel that a lot of it is kind of rhetoric for a domestic audience where he's popular and has his constituency, doesn't translate into necessarily changing foreign policy abroad. But, I have a mixed feeling. And I know that lots of Muslims think, as you say, he's the leader that they're looking for. I want to ask you about your personal experience. I know that you've been in, he talked about Syria a lot. He said the Syrian conflict has to be resolved. He wants to repatriate a lot of those Syrian refugees currently residing in Turkey. What do you think? How can that conflict be resolved? Because it's 10 years now, and it's absolute disaster and destruction on the ground. How can it be resolved?
Unfortunately, I think that Syria is at a state at the moment where it's very difficult to see if there's any sort of peace deal that could be brokered. And the war in Syria has now descended into something far greater, and that is international politics between some major players like Russia, Iran, Turkey, the Emiratis are playing a very dirty role in that region, as is Saudi. And of course, Erdogan is quite vocal about it, and with good reason. It's, the country is bordering on Turkey. He's obviously keeping a very keen eye on what's happening there. What he has been able to broker at the moment is a very sort of uneasy peace deal that enables Russian and Turkish troops to patrol together a main corridor that prevents the annihilation of what is left of the last free territory in Syria.
And talking about Idlib, I know that your friend Bilal Abdul Karim is currently still incarcerated by HTS, which controls the area. What's the latest on him, Yvonne?
Sadly, there's been no news. I've been in touch with HTS. I've asked to speak to Bilal. I've asked for some form of communication. He is being held without trial, without charge. Nobody knows where for certain. And, this is, we don't want Guantanamo arriving in Idlib. We don't want to see this sort of ghost detainee policy. But unfortunately, it is there in Idlib. HTS can dance around as much as they want. They are the ruling rebel group there. It is their responsibility. They claim to have Islamic credentials. Well, what they're doing is not Islamic. He needs to be released now. He's a journalist. He was doing an excellent job, so much so that nobody liked him because his reports were brutally frank. But as long as he was operating there, you realised that there was hope for a free Syria.
Okay, final couple of questions on Erdogan. Some people accuse him of having what they call neo-Ottomanism, taking the country back to the Ottoman Empire, an aggressive foreign policy, intervention in Syria, Iraq, Libya, other places, humanitarian intervention in other places like Somalia. What do you make of Turkey's more assertive role in the world, which is emerging over this last kind of few decades, or last decade?
Syria is right on the Turkish border. He has every right to get involved when he sees a threat to his own country. He was invited in to Libya. That's very important to remember. A lot of people forget that. And he went in to support the UN-backed government. Unfortunately, the French leader, Macron, has been quite subversive and undermined a lot of the good that Erdogan has been doing in Libya. He's not a leader that is easily intimidated. He means what he says and he says what he means. But, you pointed out about relations with Israel. He's also a pragmatist. And
I read a biography of him recently, and that came across very strongly, that he is a guy with overarching principles, and those principles are basically Islamic principles, but ultimately he's willing to make 101 compromises to get to that destination.
I think he's a great deal maker and a deal broker. And I think that in many ways he's quite fearless, and this is why his people love him. I know he has a lot of detractors within Turkey, but, to his critics, I would say if he was that bad when there was an attempted military coup, why on earth would ordinary Turkish citizens rise up and defend a tyrant?
Well, he certainly is popular in some quarters, in many quarters in Turkey. My last question on him is, obviously, in his speech today, he talked about Palestine. He always speaks about Palestine. I know the Palestinians appreciate it. He's one of the few, kind of Muslim leaders that literally wears his heart on his sleeve when it comes to Palestine, is not afraid of criticizing very harshly Israel and those who deal with Israel. But on the other hand, Turkey does have military, political, economic ties, which are thriving with Israel. How do you square that circle?
Well, I've often said that if Palestine had Algeria and Turkey for neighbours, it would have been liberated a long time ago. Erdogan plays a very canny game. He is very astute, and quite often he may be seen to be supporting one aim when in fact he's working round the clock for something else. I think that he has turned Turkey into a major power broker in the region, and certainly I don't think any sort of peace deals can be achieved in that region without influence from the Turks now because of
All right, Yvonne, if you've got a few more minutes and you can stay with us, I'm going to read out some of the comments. Are you in a rush to leave, or can you stay for 2 minutes? No, I've got to say, last week, I was just putting the comments on the screen without even reading them, and there were some really incendiary comments, so forgive me if some bad stuff comes up. All right, Ibrahim Imran says, Erdogan has absolutely benefited the Ummah. Path to Jannah says he sent planes to put out wildfires on the Zionist entity. Where are the planes to stop the bombs? I'm not sure what he's talking about there. Trash Mouse says Turkey has an Israeli embassy. I don't care what good he's done if he's a hypocrite. So we alluded to that earlier on, so we won't go back over that territory. Honor says, however, his right-hand man, Kadir Misiroglu, spent a lifetime refuting Ataturk. I'm not sure what that's on about. I don't know. You go to Turkey more than I do. I mean, I know that Erdogan does go to Ataturk's mausoleum every year, doesn't he? And pays his respect. again, you know, these are two very different people standing for two very different things, secularism and Islam.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, but you can still respect somebody who you don't necessarily agree with, and that is important. You know, the world is not black and white, good and bad, and Erdogan realizes that. And I think he's, as I say, he's a great statesman. He's a very clever player, and he does ruffle people up the wrong way. But he, you know, he's not afraid to defend people, Muslims in particular, and he's very prepared to be quite bullish about the plight of the Palestinians, the state of the Rohingya. You know, he talks the talk, but he also walks the walk.
All right, we've got a few more comments here. Nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but Islam 24/7 says, can we please discuss the current most important issue to the whole of mankind, the pandemic and scamdemic leading to the start of New World Order, taking away the famous UK democracy, freedoms and rights. What do you make of this, Yvonne? Are you an anti-vaxxer? How's lockdown been for you?
I am not an anti-vaxxer. I think anti-vaxxers are barking mad. And, you know, the lockdown is there for a reason. In Scotland, it has been particularly tough. And because obviously our rules are slightly different to those in England. And, you know, I just don't think people in England are taking it seriously.
What's it like for Muslims up there in Scotland? Every time I've been there, it appears to me that Muslims actually love Scotland and they're treated quite well there. Whereas I know Muslims maybe have more of a problematic relationship with England.
Well, it's a lot easier to wave a Scottish saltire flag than it is, I guess, an English flag. But yeah, the Muslim communities especially in Stirling, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee, Aberdeen, they have a confidence. They are, you know, they know who they are, regardless of their background or culture. Many have Scottish accents and brogues, and we have our own Islamic tartan up here as well. And people, you know, are just as happy to identify as being Scots, as well as whatever cultural background they're from. There's a fusion here.
Yeah. A few more comments, Yvonne, before I let you go. Palestine belongs to Muslims, not just Palestinians.
Well, that isn't true as well. Palestine also belongs to Christians and Jews. You know, I'm not sure if there are any Jewish people now living in Palestine, but there are certainly lots of Christians. You know, it's the birthplace of Christianity.
Yeah, plenty of Palestinian Christians there who are largely ignored as a community. And the thing about them is they stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity with their Muslim brethren against the Israeli occupation. Whereas Christians all around the world, especially those Christian Zionists in America, they support what Israel's doing. Perhaps they should listen to Palestinian Christians and amplify their narrative. If you identify your national ethnic identity first, then you're simply going against Islam. It's a shame that you can't click on people's profile and chat. Well, that's got nothing to do with the show today, but anyway, I clicked on it. All right. Jihad, anyone? Provocative comment. We always get the provocative types on 5 Pillars, don't we? Leaving comments they know that I'm going to read out. Boris got selected because he's for the Rothschild Bank, so I'm not going to entertain that. Get me into trouble. Honor says First Worldism is a religion of the Western world, simply the white man's burden. They believe they're superior morally, and if you speak against their colonialist regime, you become a terrorist. Okay, Yvonne, I'm going to let you go. Do you want to say anything else? A final word before you go?
Thank you for inviting me on. This is the first time I've been on the show. It sounds very lively and punchy. And you know, to everybody out there, stay safe and wear your mask and keep your distance. Okay.
That party political broadcast by Yvonne Ridley has just finished. All right, assalamu alaikum, Yvonne. See you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, alhamdulillah, I've got loads of messages today, well over 100 messages on my ticker. So let's read out some of them before I wrap up. Truth Seeker says, oh, he's talking to Islam 24. They can have their own private conversation. I'm not going to get involved in that. Zionists led to the fall of the Ottomans too. They threatened Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Taliban Zindabad. Ottomans made many mistakes, but also did amazing things for the Muslims. The Ottoman Khilafah would have survived the West battle if it wasn't for the Munafiqs of the East, talking particularly about the Saudi Arabians. The Ottomans were full of bid'ah and nationalism. So a raging argument between two of our readers going on the Five Pillars Facebook or YouTube wall. I'm not sure quite which. Frank says, I was behind JC, but honestly, politics I'm done with. I was behind Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, I think Muslims were kind of really enfranchised, weren't they, once again, when Corbyn was around, despite all the bad stuff that he said as well. But now, you know, what's in it for us? Nothing as far as I'm concerned. Going back to our first topic. Let's scroll down a bit. If I can find a comment which isn't from somebody that's already been read out, I will endeavor to read it out. Ekram al-Haq says Muslims should leave Labour. Many people saying Sadiq Khan worse than Boris. Please talk about road closures, Busgate, Sadiq Khan putting Londoners' life, especially he's putting middle-class families in danger, etc., etc. Not a Sadiq Khan fan. Abdullah says all these so-called rebels in Syria should surrender. Yeah, some people have said that let Assad win and then the whole thing's over, although many people take a different point of view. Ibn Taymiyyah was the founder of Salafism. He said that Allah... Ooh, all right, I'm not reading out that comment. Okay, and I love Curry Yeehaw. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Curry Goblin, for sharing that wisdom with us. Really appreciate it. Wasted a few seconds of my life there, which I'm never going to get back. Okay, I could read out more comments, but I think I've read out enough for the time being. I think I've all given you a fair crack of the whip. So I'm going to wrap up now. So we've been talking today about the Labour Party and the UN General Assembly. Look, Labour is no longer the Labour of Jeremy Corbyn. Muslims had a stake in the system when Corbyn was around. A lot of Muslims were very enthusiastic to vote for him, and they did in 2 general elections, despite the fact that Labour didn't really offer a lot in return apart from rhetoric. But now Jeremy Corbyn's no longer there. There simply is no excuse. I can't vote for Labour. I can't vote for a Labour that supports Israel. I can't vote for a Labour that supports Tony Blair's modernization of the party, that won't say a damn thing against Trump, that won't say a damn thing about imperialism, that implements capitalism at home. There's just nothing in it. If you're a self-respecting Muslim, how can you beg for a few crumbs at the Labour table just so that you can become an MP or a councillor or have some influence? Really, are you going to sell your soul as cheaply as that? This party is New Labour. It's back to being the party of the warmonger Tony Blair and the capitalist Gordon Brown. We need to get out of this obsession with mainstream politics. It hasn't worked for us. It simply hasn't worked for us as a community. We need to build our own institutions, self-financing, independent, strong institutions, whether they be political institutions, media institutions, financial institutions. It's happening, alhamdulillah. When I was small, there was hardly a meat shop around the corner. There was hardly a madrasa or a mosque around the corner. But now, alhamdulillah, the Islamic community is rising. And we just have to basically stop hitching our future to these mainstream parties that disrespect us, that don't give a damn about us. And perhaps once we build those strong institutions, we can form our own narrative. And then the mainstream will have to listen to that narrative, akin to what ultimately the Jewish party, the Jewish community has done so successfully over the last 100 years. In terms of America, look, America is